I've actually got a diluted pot with burnt sienna in it, or a diluted wash. So I'm just going to show you what my diluted wash is. That's sort of at its strength. Yeah. Okay. Now, I've on my image, on my drawing, I added water to it so that I could use a paler wash. So I'd say that was my lightest wash, and that's my medium wash. And then I've also got a sort of undiluted burnt sienna, and that looks like this. Okay, I'll bring that down a bit. Okay, so I would have all three available. Now, if you want to make a wash, and you don't need like masses of it, but enough so that you can go back to it and reuse it. I would, have a little pot of the very dilute one. Don't worry about making a wash of that, because you're going to use that with your pen mostly. And then a medium wash that you have as well. In fact, I think really it looks, because I went over it, it doesn't look a true mid one. The mid one is more like that. It's coming up the same in the camera, but basically I would call this is number one, the lightest, number two, the mid one, and number three, the dark one. Now, you know all about this from your watercolor classes. The process is we work with the lightest wash first, and then use the medium wash, later on, and then the darkest at the end in the process of our image. In the process of doing this subject, which I've got here, which I'll just show you all again, I realized, I started with all this up here, this foliage, and I realized that I needed to be able to create a range of marks in order to describe those. It's a montana, a pink montana, which is cascading over this fence bit at the top of the wall. It goes all the way along the garden. I haven't done this bit here. I've only just done that bit, and that took me ages. I've decided that I needed to do the flowers first, because they are pale pink and they're the lightest thing in the foliage. So if you can, you can see in my iPad, I'm sorry it's a bit blurry because it's through the window, but the flowers, all these flowers on the montana they're a very pale pink. Okay, so I started with those, and I realized that they're a 4-petal flower, but I mean, irrespective of whether you've got flowers, if you haven't got flowers, it doesn't matter. But knowing how to make marks to actually describe the form, especially with greenery and foliage. And we did quite a bit of looking at this with the John Ruskin, do you remember last week? And even the Hilda one, we were looking at ways of describing vegetation to give the sense of, that what it's really like. And I realized once I'd done this, and I'd also put pale washes underneath. So I started with once I'd done the white flowers, I then put between the little flowers, there is a lot of dense green foliage. And so where the dense green foliage was, I use a combination of cross-hatching and also wash. You can just listen to all this. I'm going to show you in a minute. When I got down to this part where there's a lot more foliage, or it's a winter flowering jasmine and it now has no flowers on it, it's just all green. And so I decided I would actually use my paintbrush, my little paintbrush. I dipped it in the ink and I made marks with that. For the woody bits, the actual little viney bits from which the Montana grows, I actually use my pen as a drawer, as a, to create the lines of the branches. And then obviously when you get down to the grass, which I haven't developed, there's a further texture that you need to create. So I'm going to start by showing you, and I think it will be worthwhile you're having a practice on this practice piece of paper. I'm going to use the undiluted ink with my nib. Now, just to remind you about cross-hatching, if it seems appropriate, then use it. When you do cross-hatching, it's important that the lines are not just random, that they are controlled. And to make them dark, you put them very close together, like I'm doing. So the spacing is absolutely regular. And then you can, cross-hatching means going over it, crossing over. And again, the spacing needs to be regular and even. And you can already see that 2 layers of pen lines make a darker area. To make it even darker still, you can go over it a further time in a different direction. Again, with the lines close together and evenly spaced. And you can see already that has created a dark, okay? So what I actually did with my washes is I got my wash on the paper. I'm going to let that dry a minute. That's a light wash. And then I went over it with the cross-hatching. That's another technique. So I'm not going to do it until it's dry. The leaves or flowers in your subject, which you may or may not have, depending, if you're using a nib like mine, you can vary the thickness. That's what's so lovely about it. You can vary the thickness of the line. It's not so easy to do with a fine liner. It's not so easy to get a variety of line. Leaves, again, you can create, lovely feeling of a leaf. And I would like you to just practice this on this paper, if you've got leaves in your subject, just to draw some leaves. If a leaf curls over, like in my case, some of them do, you do it like that. You make the lines literally cross over each other. And then again, you could use some shading or cross-hatching at the back of the leaf where it's dark. Now, those are sort of simple little drawing things that you could do. I also decided that if I just did this with my pen, I just pressed down hard and did short lines, that was quite appropriate as well for leaf making, lots of leaves together. Yeah. So, exploring what your pens will do is actually quite an important thing. Where grass is concerned, you can do fine lines, or you can do thick lines, short lines, long ones. You can vary the length of them. If you've got a border on like I have with grass on it, you can actually press down quite hard and create a whole line of grass. That it's the texture really that I'm doing with my pen. Yes. Now, this one is actually dry, so I'm going to work over the top of it. So in some cases, I use the wash underneath to help me rapidly cover a large area of tone. and I just used my pen, like I think Ruskin does, just here and there to create a sense of what, you know, the whether it's a leaf or a flower or what it is, or a stem with a little head on it, or little circles, or what have you. So I just experimented, really. So putting the ink over the dry wash was actually very useful for these large areas up here and down here. Now, I did mention the small brushes, and I think the small brushes are useful as well. So I put my little brush into the undiluted ink, and I can make, sorry, enough on there. I can make sort of marks with my brush, which are very different to the marks I would actually make with my pen. They're broader marks, but they also were useful in what I did. You know, when I was trying to cover, you know, the sort of winter flowering jasmine, I used the brush as well as the pen. Okay, and you can obviously use it on its tip like you would normally to make a finer mark. You know, like we would in watercolor, but you can get a sense of a different type of mark making with a paintbrush to what you can with a pen. So I think it's quite useful to do some of these exercises just to get the feel of your equipment. When I was talking about, you know, having the little twiggy bits coming down, remember what you learned from me last week about, you have a little branch, it's thick, the main part of the branch or whatever it is might be thick, and then it divides and you get these little finer wispy bits coming off it. You know, if you want to take your brush and you know, build up the tone in the center of the branch or whatever it is that you might be drawing, you can do that with your brush. I think it's easier than trying to do it with a pen. Okay, and then of course, you know, might have little leaves coming off that. Okay,
ink everywhere.
Is that, can we all have a little go at doing something like that, please? Just a few exercises just to explore the medium before we launch into the work itself. I did a light outline. You can see a bit of the pencil work here. I didn't do very much, but mine has lots of perspective in it. So I had to ensure that I wasn't going to make a complete mess of that. Yeah, so that's why I did it in pencil first, just to give myself a little bit of a chance to check the proportions of things and to consider the shapes that I wanted in there. I mean, I found these rooftops above my wall. I thought they were actually very interesting, and I'd never thought about drawing them before. I just looked out there this morning and I thought, now, you know, what is interesting outside? I love this corner of the garden anyway to sit in, but you know, I just thought, well, yeah, the rooftops above the wall are also quite interesting. So that's why I included them. And I, you know, I wanted to be able to make sure that I got the perspective right. I'm sitting on a high chair, so I'm looking down on the table and the bench and the flagstones in the foreground. I wanted to sit on a high chair, so I got a decent view of what was out there. So it seemed appropriate to be high up. Yeah. Yeah. So that I'm just